Okay, remember that they're changing my voice. This video series is about romantic injustice. Romantic injustice is the main cause of rape. And we're going to be discussing different things that also contribute to rape, the contributing factors other than romantic injustice as well. So in this first part, let us zoom in on the idea of romantic injustice, right, in its countless forms. Okay, it is obviously rampant and obnoxious. For those of you who don't know that it's obvious, that's okay. You'll understand it shortly. So first, let's take the case of the ideal man. Okay, for us to truly understand what romantic injustice is, we have to have a point of reference for ideal. I know a lot of people don't want it to be said. So I'd like to point out that the racial competition as such is over. Right? We're entering an age of transhumanism where the government cannot meet the burden of proof for why. They can't meet the burden of proof in regards to proving that they're not manipulating genes and other things with the corporations behind the scenes and otherwise. So therefore, races as you know them will cease to exist. So they've almost ceased to exist already. Now, I have to bring up the ideal person, right? Because you have to understand who deserves the most attractive women, who deserves to be happy the most. Because when we look at females as a group, if they were to say Dick Dastardly, okay, from the Wacky Racers, or Gargamel from the Smurfs, and they were to see the ideal person, whose happiness do you think they should prioritize? And when they look back at their life, should they be happy that they dated Gargamel or Dick Dastardly? Or should they only be happy if they dated somebody who has a lot of moral worth? So the ideal man is the top martial artist ever, and time has shown us that he is mulatto. He's me. Now, if you think about the ancient empires of the world, India, Persia, Kush, Egypt, what have you, most people immediately think of the first pharaoh of Egypt as the ideal emperor in the ancient world. I'm sure there's a lot of nice Indian guys, but they're not as great warriors and they're not as graceful. They think of the Kushite Empire. Some have some grace, right? But they're not as graceful as the idea of a mulatto guy or a light-skinned black person who is very gentle, right? So we think of very black Africans as kind of more rough, for better or worse. I'm not trying to insult anybody, just we have to get to the bottom of this together here. If you disagree, please put in the comments, We think of the Greeks, right? They came way later, right? They weren't as smart as the Egyptians, so they came way later. And they're kind of rough and kind of too thick to really be pinpointed ideals. Some people like people who are thicker more, but the universal is going to be somebody who's tall, athletic, light-skinned, handsome, no lipstick on his face. And if people put lipstick on his face to depict him that way, they make it so their groups sink lower. We look at Persia, right? Same thing, right? Some guy, maybe he has black hair, maybe he doesn't, kind of lighter skin, maybe he even has light brown skin. It's not the same thing as the Egyptian pharaoh. The top martial artist is the top martial artist. Martial is even marital scramble. So why am I pointing this out? Well, again, I can't stress this enough. I'm not pointing this out for racial supremacy. I'm not a black supremacist or mulatto supremacist or an ancient Egyptian supremacist. I've never even been to Africa in my life. The only place I've been outside of America is Canada. I'm pointing this out because you need a point of reference for the ideal, so we know what romantic justice is. This is why Horus in ancient Egypt was a deity of justice, and the archetype of Pharaoh, the archetype of the ideal man, in a very multicultural place where races from all over the world were there. Some people even try to argue that the Egyptians were magically white because there were so many other races there. There was Semites, there was whites, Asiatics, what have you. Kushites, Nubians. Okay. So what happens when society plays stupid about that? Well, what happens is everybody who's a jerk, for example, feels like that it's a free-for-all. If you deny what the ideal is, then everyone's just kind of snatching females in their own way. Maybe they're doing it by force, maybe they're human trafficking, maybe they're coercing in a corporation, Maybe they're using their fraternity network unfairly and their connections unfairly. And there's a lot of people saying things like, where does that leave me? And a lot of them are angry people. Maybe they're in the military, in a gang, biker gang. Maybe they're just a bully. Maybe they're just a regular guy who becomes a serial rapist or something. Because you've impressed upon them that everyone just snatches these females. Now, excuse my French here, but they even call a vagina a snatch. That's how far gone society is. They even call it a snatch, historically. They even call consent consent. And the construct, and they continue. And people have a false sense of confidence. So for people to think that you don't need a point of reference is insane. For people to put their racial supremacy above being honest about the universal point of reference makes them very racist. There comes a point when pride becomes extreme racism. When it comes a point when racial ambition becomes extreme racism. So I'm going to end this first part because I don't want to go on and on about it in this first video. I want to make this somewhat short here by talking about two things. One is Proverbs 23:28. Like a bandit, she lies in wait and multiplies the unfaithful among men. Okay, so not only do people get raped, do people kill themselves over who's sleeping with who, but babies come about, and the whore who doesn't understand who's ideal and who isn't, the whore that doesn't treat people fairly, and the scoundrels who encourage her, multiply scoundrels on this planet. They bring about children who are evil. So now let's look at this situation. Here I'm the most righteous person that ever lived, the top martial artist ever. Focus, moral intensity is proven righteous intensity. The most godlike because I'm the most righteous. Who is the most like God if not the one who draws on the spirit of righteousness and conveys it as the top martial artist ever possible? Everything else is peanuts compared to that. So when a female says she's like Belle from Beauty and the Beast, the cartoon back in the day, she sees what's going on. And she says, hey, let me try to help you find a date. Already she's done more than a lot of, basically every female who's not trying to help. But if she is to say, well, Ursula from The Little Mermaid is trying to change your life and she's having trouble dating too, maybe you should date her. That is a profound injustice. And that also feeds into it. And say some guy who's like Zangief from Street Fighter 2, some ruffian guy, some mean guy, sees what's going on. And he says, well, that's stupid. He's this really great guy, and then she's like some, not attractive female. You're trying to get him to settle. That's dumb of you. She's like, no, it's not like that. I just thought, okay. And so that continues the process, right? Here's the most, quote unquote, virtuous seeming of females that person comes across. And what she recommends is completely stupid, which reflects on her sense of justice, her sense of judgment, her sense of romantic judgment, her sense of who should be dating who, which feeds into the idea, the very real idea, that females have a huge problem collectively when it comes to who dates who. And so now that guy wants to punish women. Maybe the righteous person wants to punish women. Maybe she wants to punish herself instead of them being in the divine order so they get it right the first time. It's pretty straightforward, right? So why would women who consider themselves decent, God-fearing women, there are probably not many of them left these days, why would they want this to play out? Because they lack the courage to do what's right. Almost certainly. Maybe some don't know what's going on, but if they did, we see time and time again in this case that females on a spectrum, they're evil on a spectrum. We see that the ones who are more decent also fail to rally and obey God through me. They rather go to the churches that are propagating the despicable falsehoods that continue the problem. And whatever else they're doing, atheists, whatever else they're doing. So now, believe it or not, I've overkill what the ideal is. Because if courage is keeping them from doing the obvious no-brain thing, the obvious thing that's the right thing, then that is a key component in what makes someone ideal. If someone has the courage to challenge every martial artist on the planet in the exact type of challenge that needs to be done in order to be the top martial artist ever possible, while everyone else shrinks to fit, immediately he's the top martial artist. They don't have responsibility, their ability to respond. They don't see the urgency of the situation. They don't see that it's an emergency for many reasons. Emerge and see. Instead, they shrink to fit. Where being the top martial artist is about rising way above the crowd and transcending. It's about striking at world record speed and challenging everybody and beating all challengers. It's about being set apart by God to be ideal. Not some mere scientist, or politician, or mere rich person. There's tons of those guys, and they're all shrinking to fit because they don't have the courage to be smart. That's why the ancient Egyptians said that the heart, corazon, core alpha zone, the heart is the seat of intelligence. So I'm much more intelligent than they are, much more brave. And as we go through the list of principles, timing, discipline, heart, and on and on and on and on, we see that I'm ideal. And only a dumb planet, meaning the people on the planet are dumb, full of complete idiots, would be full of 4 billion plus females who are shunning the top martial arts ever possible because they have inhuman dating tendencies, because they have inhuman philosophies, because they lack the basic decency to not betray the most righteous person that ever lived while pursuing some selfish relationship with some shallow person who may as well be Ronald McDonald because they're acting like a complete coward.